Okay, so we're live and we're recording. And there's Siri to let us know that we're ready. So welcome everyone to The Way to Wow, People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. I'm here every week at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. I have to think about this, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. And my guest this week is Craig Noell. And I'll talk about Craig in just a few minutes. But as I usually do, I want to do a little recap of where we've been on the show so far. So if you missed last week, my guest was Jennifer Chang of Platform.io. So Jennifer started out in the big accounting world with I don't remember the name of the big four accounting firm she was with, KPMG, I think, and eventually moved into the entrepreneurial realm and became CEO of Playform, where she and her colleagues are really at the forefront of the whole NFT phenomenon, especially from the perspective of artists and using AI to create NFT. Really, Jennifer is working to figure out, what is this going to be? It's like, same thing with cryptocurrencies. They're on everybody's lips, it seems like these days. They're probably here to stay. There's opportunities, there's challenges, and entrepreneurs are going to work these things out. And so I invite you to check out Jennifer's episode. It is excellent. She is extraordinarily articulate, and I think you will learn a lot from the lessons that we distilled in talking about her professional arc. So I invite you to do that. And let me mention next week, my guest is going to be John Rubino of JID Investments. I think I actually said this week was John, but it's not, it's Craig. So John is a Navy colleague of mine who transitioned into civilian life and started a real estate company. And again, he's extremely knowledgeable. I think you will get a lot of great information from John. And so now we're going to turn to Craig Noell. So Craig and I have known each other for, it's got to be close to 30 years, I think.
At least 30, maybe 35, yeah.
Yeah, it could be longer. We met when Craig was at Foothill Capital, which at the time was one of my biggest clients when I was in the real estate business prior to joining the Navy. And Craig put together deals at Foothill Capital. Eventually, Foothill was acquired by Wells Fargo. And I think soon after that, you moved on and you moved to New York and worked for one of the investment banks there. And I don't recall the name of the investment.
Yeah, I ran a division for Goldman Sachs.
Okay, for Goldman Sachs. So that's about as blue chip as you get, in the IB world. And Craig, if you were to look at his LinkedIn profile, you'll see he's a recovering deal junkie. I think anyone who gets out of that world, that's probably what you're faced with, is recovering. And now Craig is involved in financing and running food companies, in particular healthy food companies. And so you can see that he's had quite a professional arc as well. And so, Craig, thank you very much for coming on The Way to Wow, People Making Money, to talk about how you got from the beginning of your career to where you are now, running a company and doing what you really love. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's great to reconnect and catch up after sort of a 20-year hiatus. I mean, didn't fall totally out of touch, but social media and a career way in the military and stuff, that was we weren't necessarily talking all that frequently.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me put you in my haversack to take it along with me. So Craig, let's kind of start at the beginning, maybe even before your days at Foothill. As a young guy figuring out what you wanted to do professionally in life, what were some of the issues you dealt with, and what were some of the thoughts you had, the challenges you dealt with in starting off on your career path?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a very small farm town. I had a graduating high school class of 62 people in a fairly poor area. I grew up in Tulare County in Central California, which is I think has the distinction of being the poorest county in the country, even though it's here in California, and has actually probably become more so that way over the last 20 years, just because of some of the trends and policies towards the farm belt and stuff. But I got a good, solid public school education there, nonetheless. The SATs are very controversial, but I always say that, for me, that was my ticket out to, distinguish myself as, I had great grades in a class of 62 people. What did it mean to anyone? But, having, top scores on the SAT meant that a school like Wharton would consider me. And, I decided fairly early on that I wasn't going to be a farmer. I think like most young kids, you really have no idea what the possibilities are. And so, thought about science or doctor or all those things, and that didn't seem like the fit to me. And somehow business did. And so, I ended up going from a small little town in California to Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania and studying finance. And I actually thought that I was going to be an accountant when I went there. And very quickly, my eyes opened. I learned about venture capital and the whole idea of backing and funding new companies and stuff like that. And so I was hooked and, graduated college and went into investment banking and spent 30 years, really ended up not with venture capital, but primarily with helping companies that were going through some sort of a life change or whatever in their business cycle to help them restructure. And some of those were companies that were over leveraged, and some were just companies that, for one reason or another, trends or other things had moved against them, and the old ways weren't workable. And we were frequently a bridge to be part of the solution to get them into the future.
So sticking with that kind of early time, so you grew up in a small farming community, I think from my impressions, and I used to do some appraising in communities like that, they're very tradition bound. There are expectations that, the children are going to take over the parents' business, so to speak. So what was it like for you to move out of that environment? How did your parents respond? How did your friends respond? What was the, what was the general climate that you dealt with in making that first big decision to really take your life in a different direction?
Well, my parents were always, very positive about education and encouraging me to, reach as high as I could. I was the third of 5 kids, so, I don't know that taking over the farm was an option for me, even if that's where my interests were. And, I was a bright kid. I was a great student. So it was natural that, my energies get directed there. What I think, as with so many people, it's very hard to know what is out there in the world. And, I think if you look at what someone does in life, the leading indicator of what industry they end up in is probably what their parents were doing. Whether that's the kid whose father's a cop and he becomes a police officer, or whether that's, Al Gore, and your father's a senator. So, that just, throughout the stratum, that sort of seems to be the sort of the leading indicator. But my mom was a teacher, and, as I got into high school and started looking about what to do and where to go, I was fortunate. I had one of my brothers is 5 years older than me, and originally went to college to study ag mechanics and design of farm equipment and stuff like that. And he ended up becoming an accountant. And so first thing he said is, well, you should read the Wall Street Journal. So since I was a sophomore in high school, I subscribed and read the Wall Street Journal. And then he sent me an article that was the top 10 business schools in the country. And he had circled Cal Berkeley, which was number 3. And I sort of looked at number 1 and said, well, why would I go lower if I could go there? And so I applied. I was fortunate, like I said, that the SAT was, I think, a great equalizer that showed people that I could compete and perform in the Ivy League. And I was fortunate that they took account to my, we had land. We weren't, poor in the strictest sense of the word, but I got a good scholarship package that allowed my family to afford it, and off I went.
So there you are in Philadelphia at the Wharton School, and you mentioned that it opened you up to a lot of new ideas, new options for your professional life. Would you talk a little bit? How did that process work? How did you take advantage of being in that new environment to make it, as shall we say, profitable, at least in the intellectual sense, as you made it?
Well, in some ways, I would say that my advice to my kids would be very different from what I did. I went there, and of course, I was very cognizant of the financial burden to my family for doing that, and so I really I graduated in 3 years, and I would say to my kids, the benefit, and really I tell every young person that I talk to, don't just do school, but go find internships and other sort of stuff related to your field, even if you're not paid and you have to volunteer, but get your foot in the door and get a feel for what it really is. Because for one thing, what you think it is or what you're learning in school typically doesn't tie in all that directly to what you do once you get out and you end up in an office or with a set of assignments relative to what it is. And I think there's a lot of people that pursue something for a lot of years and then say, I don't know if dealing with people every day as a doctor sort of what I meant to be or whatever, or drafting legal documents or different things like that. So up and down the thing, there's school and the real world are sort of two different things. The other thing is because of that, I did not get involved in a ton of activities during college. So I like to write. I might have been interested to be involved in the school paper or they had a television station there on the university and different things like that. And I didn't necessarily fully take advantage of those to the way that is possible for someone to access it. And we all make choices in life, and you don't get to run it again. And so my advice to my kids is, take it all in. Don't focus on getting one more finance class if there's an art history class or something like that. And I think today the world is even more competitive than it was when I was in college, and I think it was well on its way to being uber competitive and sort of that cognitive sorting and stuff that was happening even then. But it's even more so now. My oldest son, who's now a freshman in college, had a great hardworking academic career in high school, but it wasn't until his senior year he had a quote unquote elective, and he took art appreciation, and he's like, "Whoa, that's I've enjoyed this way more than I ever thought that I could." And I was happy for him, and I think it was a well-timed thing that as he's heading into college, that like I said, you don't need to get that 101st finance class. Go learn about Chinese history or something completely off the wall that you think is you'll enjoy, and it will sort of broaden your background.
Excellent. So you're finishing college, you've done some internships along the way. How did you transition from finishing college to, that first job on your professional journey? How did that work?
Well, I really wanted to get back to California after 3 winters in the Northeast. And I was fortunate. Security Pacific Bank was starting an investment banking group. It was the 10th largest bank in the country, one of the 2 major banks in Southern California. And I had I had an offer there, and getting back to Southern California was where I wanted to go. So perhaps for better or for worse, that brought me back to California, where except for my few years with Goldman Sachs, is really where I've lived. But at the end of the day, they probably weren't really as well equipped to go head to head with the big guys as their interview bravado made it seem. And so it took a few years to really sort of get established. I had a few different jobs, and then I got the job with Foothill Capital that you sort of mentioned. And at the time, Foothill had gone through its own sort of corporate transformation, where they had really taken some hits in the Texas sort of oil market. And even though they didn't do that much directly in the oil industry, one of the things you find is that any sort of small business that may have nothing to do with the oil industry, if it's in Fort Worth, it probably is impacted by the ups and downs of the oil industry. And so they went through a time of restructuring, and fortunately for me, they were sort of coming out of that and really at a time of building, and just as the junk bond market would crash in 89 and 90 and leave lots of orphan companies that needed to figure out how to restructure. And so they, John Nickel, who was the founder of the company, was brilliant, and it really, he and Scott Deal gave me a great platform where I was able to take, my unique skills of partially as a marketing person, but really as I'll call it a financial engineer, someone able to creatively sort of figure out how to solve problems and accomplish something that a lot of times other people just saw as intractable. And so I then spent the next 8 years doing that. I met Donald Trump and was involved in some stuff with him.
Wow.
I've never been extremely bullish or whatever. I mean, he's a salesman more than anything else. But the chaotic nature of his presidency, was no surprise to me. I always say, I don't know, Rudy Giuliani and I took away different things from dealing with the man. But I don't think he's evil or anything else either. So, there were just a number of companies and well-known sort of things where we were able to get involved and help someone turn things right. And it's interesting, sort of the motivations and stuff. I mean, I can say, that I believe there are a number of companies or divisions of companies that still exist because we were there to do something at the right time. But I don't think it's necessarily a higher calling that's just about saving jobs or doing good. Although I think, like just about every part of the capitalist system, by doing the right thing for your customers and the other counterparties, you end up doing good. But sometimes the way to salvage value and get it somewhere else is for it to be sold and for a division to be closed and people laid off. And so you know, ultimately, you know, that's what economics in the market and figuring out how to make the best outcome is all about.
So you mentioned that your expertise was really as kind of a financial engineer, right? Is that something you learned at the Wharton School? Is that a skill you developed along the way? And if so, how did you get to that point where you had the knowledge, the skills and the experience to be effective in that role?
You know, I don't know that that I have a clear-cut answer to that. You know, we all tend to create a narrative about, you know, how we came from somewhere and how we became something. I have a visual processing, now they call it a learning disability or something like that, where I actually don't read spreadsheets or things like that. Is very time consuming and difficult, even reading. But I was always a sponge for information. I always read a lot, whether it was the Wall Street Journal or books or whatever. And I'm very good at retaining it and putting it in context. And so, you know, I think for me, for what I did, you know, it meant that I could walk into, you know, any given company and frequently have an understanding of some of the underlying dynamics in terms of, you know, for example, in the textile industry and in the 90s, it was largely being outsourced to Asia. And, you know, having that just sort of context, you know, allowed you to get to the bottom line and figure out how to solve things just a little bit earlier, easier. And so I think that was, you know, a personal asset that I had, an ability to really create a mental model of what was going on as opposed to a spreadsheet model. And I think that spreadsheets and models are worthwhile and good, but you know, my experience is that people put way too much weight on that without sort of really understanding the dynamics. And there would be times that in my career where someone else would sort of sit in a meeting for me or something like that, and we get together and recap it afterwards, and they'd say, well, you know, it's doing about $30 million in sales a month. And I'd say, so they must be carrying $45, $50 million of inventory. And they look at their notes and say, yeah, how do you know that? And it's, you know, because there was a mental model there of, you know, how those things sort of came together that you could sort of extrapolate and know what's going on and quickly sort of maybe cut through things and say, well, if it's so much higher, what's going on? And so those, you know, those things, I don't know how to tell anyone how to do it, but, you know, really, you know, taking a look and an understanding of companies that's beyond just the numbers, I think is, you know, and having that mental model was, you know, a great assistance to me in that process.
So one of the things that I find very interesting about your answer is you started out describing essentially a disability, which by its very name would seem to be something that could hold you back. And yet you turned it on its head and turned it into something that actually helped you be more effective by, you know, sort of pushing to the side that which was difficult for you to do and really focusing on that which you could be best at, and sort of doubling down on you know those skills or those abilities you had that could really add value to a situation. So I think too often we tend to focus on, oh, I need to know this, I can't do that, and it holds us back, and you really flip that on its head. So I remember from one of the projects we worked at, or that I worked on at Foothill, I was always doing the real estate, you know, collateral review. And one time I went to visit a company, I don't want to say where it was because I don't, you know, want to give it away, but I then called the person I worked with at Foothill later that day, Dave Evans, and I kind of gave him my preliminary report, as I always did. And then I said, by the way, I said, I think you want to take a look at the fact that the guy who runs this company has basically all the knowledge in his head, and his next layer of leadership down, I don't think they can function if he's not there. And I'm not saying that's why Foothill ended up passing on the deal, but they did end up passing on the deal, I think, for a number of reasons that really didn't have anything to do with the collateral. And later I found out that a competitor did that deal and absolutely lost their shirt on it. And I think it's because, like you were saying, there's more than a spreadsheet to this kind of analysis. It's very easy to get lost in all the, cells and numbers and such, and lose sight of the overall picture. And I think we can do that in our lives as well, right? We need to be able to have that ability to step back and look at our careers. So moving now from Foothill onto, what we might call the big leagues, right? Goldman Sachs. So what was it that drove you, if you will, or impelled you to move on to this next thing and to move to New York? I mean, that's, like I said, that's really the big leagues. It seems like there must have been something inside you saying, hey, I want to do more, or what was that about?
Yeah, so I had spent 8 years with Foothill. We had, done phenomenally well. I think we had, grown our assets by 8 times over the course of that time that we were there. But at the end of the day, even though I was by far their biggest rainmaker, I still felt like I was pigeonholed into, we'll go make more rain, not, a more, holistic contribution to putting things to work. And it was a time where Goldman was looking to move into sort of the special situations area and deploy capital, sort of doing that. I had a couple conversations with other people, but I really love the ethos, I think, that drove Goldman. And I was only there for a few years, but it's probably the most fantastic place that I ever was in terms of the way they work as a team and their commitment to doing well and doing great, but also by and large a values-driven company. I mean, one of the things that led me to go there was that, at the, on their website, they had a set of corporate values that said what they were about, and it would be my view. I've met other people who felt differently, and certainly there have been, some bad eggs who have blemished the name along the way. But by and large, I felt that, that statement of values was something that, even reading it, you could see that it was reflective of their business when they talked about, their capital base and their employees and their reputations being the 3 pillars of their business, and reputation being the most important thing. You knew because of who they were and what they were that they had realized that and had esteem for that. And the first commandment was to not go do that. And so you would see other things where somebody from, say, a 28-year-old kid from Bear Stearns would, somehow end up in a newspaper or on TV, talking about the fact that he's making $250,000. And no person, at Goldman would talk about their firm and who they were in that way that did it, even if they were making that sort of thing. There was just a greater humility, a commitment to customers, but also very much a commitment to being the best and to being profitable. And in that sense, I've never been in a more exciting environment to work and do stuff.
So Was it a conscious decision on your part then at that point in your career to align yourself with a firm that perhaps more closely reflected your own values? Because you spoke about, the value statement that Goldman has on their website, et cetera. I think this is an oftentimes overlooked aspect when people are, job hunting, or even when they're starting their own business, is this idea of what are the values underlying the business? What is the culture there, right? So, would you talk a little bit more about that and how you made the decision, vis-a-vis your own values versus those of other companies that you were talking to?
Yeah. Well, at the time, I was talking to a couple of different hedge funds, and if I compare and contrast, one of the others was named after a three-headed dog from Greek mythology, and when I would go to visit them, and I probably had 8 or 10 visits over a couple month period where I was going back and forth to New York. The person that sat at the front reception desk, who's now seen me 5-6 times, would give me a blank stare when I came in. Which you think, at a certain point in time, you'd start to say whatever. And it's not that I was an important person at all relative to the people coming through, but just, at a certain point in time, you sort of do that. And, I think different stuff like that just sort of, gives you a vantage point on what it was. And so, later after I left Goldman and when I started a management firm with a money management firm with a couple of people, we chose the name Signature because I thought that it was the compare and contrast to the three-headed dog sort of thing of something that could solve problems and that at least in affectation gave off a positive vibe.
So you made that. So then after Goldman, you made the transition to essentially being in business for yourself or in business with partners. Is that, am I understand that correctly?
Yeah, we raised a small amount of capital and we started buying distressed debt. This was, I guess, 2004. And so, we had just been through a protracted recession and we did like 25 deals in the first 2 years. And then, wow, it all sort of dried up as, the economy went into a protracted growth period and banks decided that they'd rather keep their problem assets than take a discount to move them off their balance sheets. And, I think that's a reflection of the fact that we were in very liquid times and a lot of growth and that capital was very easily available to the financial system. And so, and then even as the recession of 2009 hit, we still didn't see the resurgence of distressed opportunities, and that led us to get involved with a company called Fremont Financial, which had been a $10 billion thrift, and they were one of the first people to crater when the real estate market started to collapse. And so they had lost $1 billion, had been able to really liquidate most of their assets, and what they had was $1 billion of tax loss carryforwards that could be used to offset future earnings. And so we got involved. We were really ended up in a competitive process where I wouldn't say we were a hostile bidder, but we were an unsolicited bidder where, other people had their own ideas for what to do about it. and ultimately we were able to prevail and persuade creditors to back us. We ended up cutting a deal with one of our competitors and sort of bringing them in as a partner to what we were doing. And so we reorganized with a public company that had $100 million of cash and a $1 billion net loss carry forward. I remember, at the time, getting the congratulations for people, for having prevailed in that, and thinking to myself, well, this is really just the entry card, because now we have to go, put that money to work and make it worthwhile to do that. And as fate would have it, we ended up in a cat fight where we had 9 directors, and each of them sort of had a vision that they could be CEO and have the best idea for what we should do with that $100 million. We really just had bad mojo, for lack of a better term, and spent 3 years sort of spinning our wheels, with everyone sort of fighting for their own idea of what we should do, and broken into factionalism, and and each of the directors taking $100,000 salary for what they were doing as a director. And of course, when we had put it together, we had not taken corporate type salaries for ourselves, and expected that directors and stuff would sort of do the same. But they had their own sort of thing. So we went through several steps. Sam Zell, the Chicago grave dancer, was our largest shareholder with 9%. One of their guys was on the board, they brought us an opportunity, something that they had bought a couple of years before for $65 million, and had taken almost all of their purchase price out by liquidating certain assets, and thought that we should pay $165 million. And I looked at the company. I thought it was a good company, but I was dubious that it was worth what they thought it was. And the long and short of it is we never made that acquisition, but it ended up frying my relationship with our largest shareholder, and I ended up taking a severance package and moving on. And so it's like many things in life. I say we really aren't the author of our own story, but we're a co-author. And that chapter turned out different from the way I envisioned the plot line sort of going. But it was a point in time where I'd done very well in life. I had a nice exit package, and that's the way it was. And I really at that time thought that I would move into sort of being a research professor and writing and doing other things. And I did an international program with Duke University that took me to Shanghai and to Istanbul and different places. But along the way, I also started to think about my own health and raising 3 kids. And my doctor said, you should make some changes. He says, I know nobody ever does, but I feel like I have to tell you that. And and so I started to talk to him and think about what that would be. And eventually I ended up on a low carb diet. And when I did that, I lost 35 pounds in 4 months. It really happened without trying. And I kept it off really until the pandemic, where a little too much Chinese food and whatever, some of it's come back on. But as I started to look at that and sort of think about, what we're told, is the settled science or whatever for weight loss and metabolism and stuff like that, it turned out that, what we'd been told, since the early 60s, wasn't really grounded in science. I mean, there were lots of quote unquote scientists and MDs and stuff that were espousing a certain view, but slowly but surely it had become obvious that what was there didn't work. And so that's sort of what led me to starting doing what I'm doing and backing really the principal investments, a company called Halo Healthy Tribes. And what Halo is about is not necessarily being the best food company, but with partnering with the best food companies and across the top of the packaging. I think, if you look there, that's the halo that would go across the top, and it tells you that that it's part of the Halo Healthy Tribes family, that it has no added sugar. If it's plant powered, it tells you about that. Likewise, most of it is low carb, so carb careful is sort of the moniker there. And then underneath there's a row that tells you the calories and net carbs and protein and fat grams that are in the product, so that without turning around the package, you really know the 90-10, I would say, of what you're ever going to know about it. And on the back, if you're interested more, there's what we call the allergen panel that makes you aware of any allergens that might be there. Because the thing with food is you can't create a brand that has no allergens, because if you did, you're not going to have food. But if someone's got a nut allergy, or they've got a dairy allergy, or they've got a soy allergy, you know about that. And so that's been our how we've approached things.
So you had kind of a multi-step entrepreneurial journey, going from creating a fund to buy distressed debt and working through that, and now working in your business as Halo. One of the things you mentioned along the way was you ended up having to work with some people that, perhaps in retrospect, you wouldn't have chosen to work with, right? And I think it's probably true that we oftentimes learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So as you think about that transition, what were some of the things that you would do differently if you kind of had it to do over again, or as you look to the future of Halo and other ventures you may get involved with? What are some of the things that you would do differently now, having been through this transition experience?
Well, I think cohesion is probably one of the most important things about a business and contributor to success. And and that's not to say that diversity and diverse opinions and diverse people aren't important aspects of that. But to be successful, a business really needs to come together in a cohesive way and execute on it. When I think about some of the instances like that, where we ended up with a board of directors that was very non-cohesive, and that was very disruptive. But people say, well, is there something you would have done different in the legal agreements or in different things like that? And the way we came together was out of a contentious process and bringing people together into what we thought was a very well articulated plan, and taking people at their word that they were going to back it. There might have been things that we could have done different, but I think it's really very it's very difficult. Rumsfeld had the thing of the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, and in my experience, knowing about those known unknowns and being prepared for them is important. But if I look at my experiences and I have a friend that was involved in private equity investment in a company that did stuff in the was a component supplier really to the cell phone industry. And it turned out that something came together and, all of a sudden, things fell into place and they were making 100 times more money than they ever dreamed they would make of on this investment. And it wasn't, that they had been smarter than the rest and sort of seen stuff. It was, good luck. And, likewise, I know somebody that was running a sugar manufacturer on the Texas-Louisiana border when Hurricane Katrina hit. And, they got swamped and put out of business for 12 weeks. And you could say, well, we could get hit by a hurricane, but what are the odds that, the one really hits? I mean, they've been around through a lot of hurricanes before that, but the one that hits you directly and swamps you for 12 weeks is not really, you could say that's a risk out there somewhere. Most of us probably wouldn't be that good at identifying how acute it could be. But then it's also just a matter of random chance. And, that's one of the things, I think in general with decision making is you try and make the best decision, but, with any decision you make versus the other one, there are things that could go wrong with the decision you make. There are things that could go wrong with the other decision. And hopefully you're picking the one with the best odds of succeeding. But, a couple of those, random things that may happen, can hopefully drive, uncharacteristic success or disaster. And, we all, tell stories in advance after the fact about how we, how we got there and how we were smart enough to sort of figure that out and capitalize on it. But, it's not true. And I used to have a friend that said, oh, my track record's a 40% IRR. And then you said, well, what about this or that? Well, that one doesn't count because, who could have known that a storm was going to, take out their factory? And who could have known that this was happening? But then again, another one that they were in and all of a sudden, two big industry people, decided they really, wanted that little niche business that had been ignored for years. That was not predicted either, if you're totally honest. So, we all want to be, what is it? Success has many fathers, failure is a bastard. That tends to be the truth.
So, and honestly, the lesson I'm distilling from what you've just been saying is that we have to accept, good and bad luck with the same sort of grace, if you will, and just, move from the point that we're at to hopefully a better point, whether that's, a hurricane that wiped us out or whether it's, some completely unexpected rush of business that, was really not due to any particular thing that we did, but it was, fortuitous timing or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think, life's a deck of cards at the end of the day. And sometimes you draw straight and sometimes you're one card away and you draw four. And, you got to take the hand that's dealt and deal with it. And, I think that obviously there are people that start with, with better opportunities and stuff. And there are, people that aren't. But at the end of the day, you got to take what God gives you, and that's really the truth.
I think so. So we have just a few minutes left. So I want to, if I can, kind of summarize what I think are some of the lessons we can take from your life. And first of all, Craig, you started out as a farm boy. I mean, I kind of have a picture of you, barefoot, running around the farm. Maybe not so, inaccurate, and really reaching, Goldman Sachs, the absolute pinnacle of, corporate finance, really in the world. I mean, we're talking about one of the world's greatest companies, right? That's an amazing you know, career progression that I think shows us that if we're clear-minded of purpose and we're willing to put in the hard work, that we can make even these really huge leaps. So that was one thing I heard you talk about. Another thing was, this is something I think from your brother saying, well, read the Wall Street Journal. If I would expand it, I might say, if you're really interested in a particular industry or a particular clear career path, we should really dive into learning about that industry, learning about that path, and that's just part of the cost of entry, if you will. We're not going to get paid to do that, nor this is something that you mentioned in common with my guest last week, Jennifer. She also talked about doing unpaid internships, just taking whatever opportunities there were to be involved in a particular industry or business and learning from it and giving, you know, as much value as you possibly could, even in a situation where you're not being compensated. And it really comes back to you, maybe not in the near term, but over the long term, it comes back to you really in spades. And then I think the last couple of things is, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, there were times in your career that you were really willing to step out and take some risk. And sometimes the risk paid off, and other times maybe not how you thought it would, but you know, you kind of rolled with the punches and you made the best of the situation in which you found yourself, and use that for a springboard to the next, you know, the next step in your professional journey. So I think, you know, to the extent that all of those are you know, accurately portraying your, you know, your professional arc, these are all lessons that we can apply, you know, to our lives, and in getting to where we want to go professionally. So I want to sort of hand it back to you to comment on my summary, whether I was accurate or inaccurate, and anything you'd like to add to that in the last couple of minutes here before we have to wrap up.
Yeah, I think that's a great summation. You know, my view on life is that, you know, there's nothing like hard work and preparation as a driver for success. And obviously having some latent talent and the rest of that stuff, you know, has an impact on it as well. But, you know, the other thing is that, you're going to get some cards that are unexpected, and, you know, not everyone that's a billionaire did it because of how brilliant they are. Not that they didn't build that, so to speak, but that, you know, there's a lot of contributors to it. And likewise, you know, and I think this is one of the great things that Silicon Valley has realized is that people, you know, people fail, and that's not necessarily a personal reflection on them. And, you know, the key is to get up and dust yourself off and keep going. And, you know, there's a lot of challenges in life, and you know, business and working is only part of it. You know, the personal relationships and you know, the personal tragedies that can intervene and stuff like that are, you know, there, and you got to sort of keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Craig, if people want to know more about Halo and the work you're doing with healthy eating, healthy foods, and promoting brands, so that we know about them and know how they can, where can they find out about that? Do you have a URL for a website or something?
Yeah, we have a website. It's halohealthytribes.com. And that'll take you to a little bit about us, and then there's 5 different brands that are associated with the company right now, and there's links that will allow you to visit each of them as well. And then, you know, if anyone wants to get in touch, Craig at halohealthytribes.com is my email, so it's fairly straightforward.
Okay. And are you looking for more brands to team with? Are you looking for more capital? What are you looking for as the future of Halo Healthy Tribes?
Yeah, well, we've been at it for 2.5 years and really had expected to go and have our coming out party in March of 2001 at the Natural Food Expo, which is this huge event that takes over everything at the Anaheim Convention Center. And of course, March of 2001, we were literally, my son and one of the other people were there starting to put together our booth when the news came down that because of COVID, it had been canceled. And so, we are now, really having that coming out party this March, and have been through, 2 years of, by and large good stuff, but, the delays, the difficulties, and, the supply chain and all of that, are real challenges that we've had to grapple with. So, but we're excited. That's a place for us to tell our story, and it's a place for us to recruit more brands to become part of what we're doing.
Excellent. Well, Craig, thank you so much for coming on The Way to Wow, People Making Money, and talking to us, sharing your story and the lessons that we can glean from it. I really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. I've got my fingers crossed that we're going to be making money soon as we get out to market. So thanks for having us on.
You're welcome. So folks, thank you very much for joining us. Marty, thank you for being here. And for all of you watching online, thank you for joining in. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them into any of the comment boxes. Right after we conclude this session, we'll be up on our YouTube channel, The Way to Wow Show on YouTube, and you can always leave a comment there. And you can also feel free to go to our website, thewaytowowshow.com, and you can contact me through the website if you have any thoughts, ideas on how to improve what we're doing. If there's someone you think would be a great guest for the show, I'd love to hear about that. Especially if it's you, love to have you come on and tell us about how you found your way to wow professionally. So a couple things before we wrap up. One is a week from tomorrow, March 3rd, my friend and colleague, Leah Siegel, will be launching her weekly show. It's called The Way to Wow, Securing Your Financial Foundation. Her guest is going to be Jeff Condon, one of the absolute top one of the top estate planning attorneys in the country. And so Leah will be kicking off 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time. I invite you to join her. I'll be co-hosting with her probably at least for the first couple of weeks. I think you will find that she has a tremendous amount of knowledge and information that she can pass along to you. Next week, again, my guest is John Rubino of JID Investments. So I invite you to join us to hear John and to come and ask questions about how to get involved professionally in the real estate business. John has had tremendous success at his company with his partner, David, and he's also got a very fascinating journey that starts out at the Merchant Marine Academy of all places. So again, thank you very, very much for joining us. Appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. I don't know what the date is off the top of my head because I can't keep the calendar in my head. Let's see, what's today? Today's the 23rd. So it'd be Thursday. It's got to be like February 2nd, I guess. Wednesday, February 2nd. Oh, of course, because Thursday is the 3rd. So Wednesday, February 2nd, 12:30 Pacific time, 3:30 Eastern time. The Way to Wow, People Making Money. Thanks for joining us.